welcome to worship this morning with the people called United Methodist in Havre, Chester, and Big Sandy, Montana. So glad you're here to worship and celebrate and be refreshed this morning. Be comfortable, and we will join together in the call to worship. This is based on Psalm 98. Shout triumphantly to the Lord, all the earth. Be happy and rejoice out loud. Sing your praises. Sing your praises to the Lord with the sound of music. With trumpets and horns, we shout triumphantly before the Lord our God. Let the sea and everything in it roar, world and all its inhabitants too. Let all the rivers clap their hands, and let the mountains rejoice out loud. Rejoice, for the Lord is coming to establish justice upon the earth. This morning's reading is from the book of Job. We're continuing on with Job, and this is God's reply to Job after God chastises Job's friends who kept insisting that Job had done something wrong, and that's why he was suffering so badly. And God is here responding to Job and Job's complaint and argument. This is from chapter 38 and 39. Then the Lord answered Job out of the whirlwind, "Who is this that darkens counsel by words without knowledge? Gird up your loins like a man. I will question you, and you shall declare to me. Where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth? Tell me if you have understanding. Who determined its measurements? Surely you know. Or who stretched the line upon it? On what were its bases sunk? And who laid its cornerstone when the morning stars sang together and all the heavenly beings shouted for joy? Can you hunt the prey for the lion or satisfy the appetite for the young lions when they crouch in their den or lie in their covert? Who provides for the raven its prey when the young ones cry to God and wander about for lack of food? Do you know when the mountain goats give birth? Can you observe the calving of the deer? Do you know the numbers of the months that they fulfill? And do you know the time when they give birth? When they crouch to give birth to their offspring and are delivered of their young? Their young ones become strong, and they grow up on the open, and they go forth, and they do not return to them. Just heard part of God's response to Job's complaints, and it doesn't sound terribly sympathetic, does it? It seems more of a reminder that God cares deeply about creation, and that I, as a human being, I am not the center of the universe. Now, don't we humans have a tendency to think that? With each new amazing discovery or technology, with each new event that's in the news, it's very tempting to think that we understand how everything works, or that we know how to fix it if it's not working. But we have only to go outside our own front door and spend time in wild places or in other lands to realize that maybe we don't know as much as we think we do, or to see the oil spills, or to see the extreme weather from climate change, or to see the many hospital wards filled with COVID-19 patients. Maybe we aren't as in control of things as we like to think we are. I sometimes wonder about knowledge and the ways that we have forgotten as we have become an industrialized and globalized, computerized society. What lessons from the earth and from our ancestors have we forgotten? Here's a simple example. Bon ami, which is French for good friend, was a cleaner that my grandmother used to use. I can remember her telling my grandfather, don't forget the Bon Ami, which is on the shopping list. It was made in 1886 and it's still around today. And on the label, it has a little baby chick in it, a phrase that says, it hasn't scratched yet. Well, I get the idea that the manufacturer's trying to say that our dishes and our dinnerware are going to be safe if we use Bon Ami on it to clean it. But why the image of the chick? Well, this spring I rescued 4 little chicks when their mother hen was killed as they were hatching. 2 loose dogs had gotten a hold of the mother, and a couple of the chicks were still wet with the amniotic fluid from the egg. They had just hatched. So I gathered them together and I put them in a cardboard box with a hot water bottle, to try to keep them warm and let them dry out. And not very long, they were busy scratching with their little claws on the bottom of their cardboard because I had put some wheat germ there. And I wondered, how did they learn to scratch without a mother hen to show them? And how is it that they are born knowing how to get their own food? Perhaps there are ways and things that we have never known, but are known to our non-human beings in our midst. Consider the baby salmon that hatch from eggs that are laid in the gravel of the western rivers of the United States on the West Coast. And from the time that they are hatched, they know that they need to swim down the river to the ocean in order to live out their adult lives. And as they're living out their adult lives and getting bigger and bigger, how is it they suddenly, at some point, know that it's time for them to go back to that mouth of that river and leave the ocean and swim up into the freshwater river to the exact places where they came from, to lay the eggs in the gravel once again and continue that life cycle? How do monarch butterflies, who have just emerged from a cocoon that they went into as a caterpillar, how do they know to go to a specific place in Mexico to winter over? And how do migrating birds or caribou know that it's time to move on to the next place? And how do they know how to get there? And let me ask you this, how do birds and animals know that there is going to be an earthquake long before scientists' sensitive seismic instruments have detected the slightest tremor? Well, I think it would be simplistic to say that God tells them in the sort of way that you and I might tell a friend of an impending disaster. But still, animals seem to have this innate knowledge that humans do not experience and we do not understand. And doesn't it seem reasonable that the spirit of the divine dwells in the mysteries of non-human lives just as much as in human lives? Now, this is not a new theological thought. For centuries, millennia, Jews and Christians and people of other religions have believed that God is present everywhere and in all things. Theologians call this the immanence of God, that God's presence encompasses all things and yet is beyond the things that it encompasses. In Jeremiah 23, "Am I a God at hand, declares the Lord, and not a God far away? Can a man hide himself in secret places so that I cannot see him, declares the Lord? Do I not fill heaven and earth, declares the Lord?" The Apostle Paul wrote to the Colossians, "Christ is before all things, and in him all things are held together." Old Testament scholar Alyssa Jones Nelson says that wisdom literature, like the book of Job in the Bible, teaches us that the mysteries of the natural world help us understand about the mystery of God. In theological terms, the sudden experience of God is called a theophany. It's like epiphany, except the subject is theo, Dios, God, by any name. Theophany. Now, the Bible has many stories of theophany utilizing the elements of nature. God is experienced in wind, in a fire of a bush, in a pillar of a cloud, in storms, or in birds that come down and land on people or feed people, or even the silence of a cave. But what about the mysteries of the ocean and the seas of the earth? With technology, humanity can see and experience much into the realm of these water worlds. Theophany happens to us today, and here is why I believe this. This week, I watched a 2021 Oscar-winning documentary called My Octopus Teacher. And in it, Craig Foster was a burned-out, exhausted filmmaker who spent a year at home snorkeling in the kelp forest off from his home in South Africa. As he revived his spirit, he encountered one day a strange object at the bottom of the sea floor in the middle of a kelp forest. And as he hovered by, filming it, wondering what it was, it looked like a spherical blob that somebody might have glued with a hot glue gun, glued different seashells to. And then all of a sudden it exploded. And as the shells went flying everywhere, an octopus jetted out into the kelp forest to get away from him. It turned out that the octopus had used its 2,000 tentacles on its 2,000 suction cups on its 8 tentacles, and had picked up seashells and other debris and wrapped them around herself to encrust herself in these shells like a barricade to keep her soft body safe. Now, he was just so intrigued by this that Craig decided to snorkel every day and try to capture film once again, of nature. And his subject was going to be the octopus. So he spent a year snorkeling out every day and trying to take film of the octopus. And after a few weeks, the octopus had come to trust this strange human that was snorkeling down into her kelp forest. And one day, as he was filming her and had the camera out there, she stretched out a tentacled arm, and she touched his hand and then slowly moved her tentacles up from his hand up through his arm so that she could try to understand what this strange creature was. Over the year in which he filmed her, he was so impressed with her intelligence, and he learned what she ate and how she caught them, her prey, and how she avoided being prey of the many pajama sharks that also live in that kelp forest. And then on one of their last days together, he filmed her on the seafloor below a school of fish that had come into the kelp forest. And they were kind of hovering around above the octopus, and she would throw out a tentacled arm like a lasso, and the fish would move away from it a little bit. And then she would throw out another tentacle in the other direction, and they would move back. And they kept doing this back and forth motion of lassoing out a tentacle and the fish moving. And it looked like an underwater ballet with the octopus being the director of their dance. And after the school of fish swam away, the octopus swam over to Craig and put her head and her arms against his torso, and he wrapped his arms around her. And he said it felt like she'd come over to just give him a huge hug of joy at how much fun she had had playing with a school of fish. Craig's life was changed by that octopus. He reflected at the end of the movie about how knowing the octopus had, and the world that she lived in, and her experiences, and understanding more about her intelligence, and forming that relationship changed him. And it affected his human relationships too. He became more vulnerable. He became more available to people, especially his family. And he started teaching his son about the wonders of the kelp forest. And pretty soon, Craig decided to start leading groups of people into the kelp forest, snorkeling, so that they too could experience the wonders upon wonders of this world. And he raised money and continues to raise money to protect the kelp forests around the world today. Chief Luther Standing Bear speaks of his concern about how far humanity has moved away from nature. He reflects upon this, and he says, The old Lakota was wise. He knew that man's heart away from nature becomes hard. He knew that lack of respect for growing and living things soon led to lack of respect for humans too. Sometimes I wonder about what I can do to make our world more compassionate. And I wonder and worry about the world that we are leaving to our children and our grandchildren. I want them to experience the joy of encountering nature and wild things that I did as a young person, and of knowing that God, who is close by to me and is in nature too. Baba Diom is a Senegalese forest engineer, and in a paper he presented in 1968 to the International Union for the Conservation of Nature and Natural Resources, IUCN, Diom made this much quoted statement: "In the end, we will conserve only what we love. We will love only what we understand, and we will understand only what we are taught." As a pastor, I often ask people about their spiritual practices, about how they have learned to stay close to God. Where do you experience God's love and goodness in your life? And overwhelmingly, people say to me, well, we go outdoors. I go outdoors and I lift up my heart and my prayers to God. And that's where I feel close to God, is when I'm walking or I'm running or I'm swimming or I'm gardening or driving across the landscape. I lift up my heart and I give thanks to God when I play with my children and my grandchildren. Or I lift up my heart and pray when I'm drinking a cup of coffee and thinking how good it is and how good life is. And I ask guidance for my life and in my day. Is this how we change the world? By starting with ourselves and with our family and our friends and in the environment in which we live? How did you learn about nature? How did you learn about God? Maybe someone took you hunting or fishing or camping by a lake. Maybe you can't do those things anymore, but can you watch a documentary of nature with your children or grandchildren and talk about it? Can you invite them to go with you outdoors and close their eyes for just 1 minute? And after that minute, talk about all the different things that you heard? Or could you go outdoors and spread out a blanket and lay down and look up at the blue sky and talk about the water that makes up the clouds and how that water has come from oceans and seas far away? Let us speak in our lives about the wonders upon wonders of nature and how we have experienced God there, and how God's grace upon grace has been part of our lives. God's imminent presence has been with us throughout our lives. This is my prayer for you this week, my friends. May you look at the world around you and experience God's presence. May you be amazed at the mysteries of the human life and the non-human life both. And may you find hope in the God who dwells in you and all things and beyond all things. And may you know that God is